Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for standing by in today's session in the ReadyTalk webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled Webinar Fatigue, How to Fix It. My name is Simone Abers, and I am the Demand Generation Manager here at ReadyTalk, and I am joined by Eric McCall, who is the Director of Marketing over at Scripted. We're each going to give you a brief introduction as to who we are and a little bit better idea of what we do at our companies, and then I'll dive into the presentation this afternoon. But first, I do want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. So during the presentation, all the participants are going to be in a listen-only mode. However, if you guys have questions at any time, feel free to chat those into the chat feature, and that's going to be on the left-hand side of your screen. We'll queue all those questions up at the end, but we'll definitely make sure to get to them and leave plenty of time. Also, you guys have probably seen this. If you are on Twitter, on the social side, today's hashtag is WebinarWakeUp. So if you'd like to continue the conversation there with any questions or comments, feel free to do so, and there are all our Twitter handles. And then as a reminder, today's event is being recorded Tuesday, April 29th, and you guys are going to receive a link to this recording in the post-event email, which will go out later this afternoon. You'll also get a PDF of the slides. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm the Demand Generation Manager here at ReadyTalk. I've been here for about 6 years, and I've actually worked on both the sales and marketing teams here. Most of the stuff that I manage today is our email marketing programs, content creation, all the fun list sourcing and segmentation, our webinar series, which you're on today, and our prospect newsletter. So if you've received one of those, you're on our opt-in list. Now you have a face to go with a name. I like to think I invented Cartwheel Fridays here at ReadyTalk, which is basically just inviting people to do cartwheels in our marketing department on a Friday afternoon. Got to keep it fun, and I have an awesome little blue heeler named Bucket. So now you have a little bit more of a personal connection to me. So I'm going to hand it over to Eric to do his brief presentation, and then we'll kick off our slides today with some poll questions.
Thanks, Simone. Hi, guys. My name is Eric. I'm the Director of Marketing at Scripted. Scripted is a content writing service where we have a freelance network of freelance writers. I've been in the digital marketing world at agencies as well as working in sales and marketing for about 5 years. And I'd say my responsibilities are similar to Simone's, mostly responsible for driving revenue and leads to our sales department, as well as overseeing our newsletter, our blog, all sorts of content initiatives. Some fun facts: I started a brewery tour company in San Francisco, so I had to often give speeches about beers, and I also had to taste them a lot, so it was a really tough job. And I'm also an identical twin. So now it's a little bit more about me, and looking forward to talking to you guys.
Great. Thanks, Eric. So like I said, let's kick off today's presentation so we get a little bit better understanding of you. And also, again, these questions are going to apply later on in the event itself. So how many webinars are you guys doing per year? Is it 1 to 4, 5 to 12, 13 to 24 plus, or we don't actually do webinars yet, and maybe that's why you've jumped on this call to get ahead of the curve to avoid the webinar fatigue? Go ahead and start answering your questions, and we'll kind of see where people come in. So it looks like we've got a pretty heavy audience on the side of doing a lot of webinars, which I expected. A few that don't do any yet, but the majority are looking like we've got 13 to 24 plus a year. So I'll close those poll results out. All right, so then my next question for you guys, if you are doing webinars, what is your biggest webinar challenge? We aren't getting enough quality leads from them. Our attendance rates are dropping. We're not actually doing a very good job of repurposing the webinar content, or there's really a lack of quality follow-up. So go ahead and take a couple seconds here to answer this. You'll see those results coming in. It looks like we've got a majority of the people, the attendance rates are dropping. Again, a good reason for you guys to be on the call today. We hope we can address that. Second place, not enough quality leads. I'll give you a second here, and I'm going to close out the poll. All right. So it looks like almost 40% of you, you're concerned with your attendance rates dropping, which I think is pretty common right now. Again, why we thought this is as a timely time to do a webinar like this. And then it looks like not enough quality leads and then lack of quality follow-up. It's good to see that a lesser majority of you are repurposing your webinar content, so congrats there. All right, so let's dive in. Webinar fatigue. The dangers are real. We obviously experienced this based on the polls that we just answered. So put together a quick slide on why I think webinars fail and thus attending kind of your attendance rates. So too many webinar invites. People are being inundated with webinar invites. You yourself probably see at least 5 plus come across your inbox every week. And again, how do you make yours stand out? Content, it's the same old, same old. It fails to entice. Maybe your content, when you do think about putting to your content, has to be something that your audience really wants to learn, not just what you think they need to hear. Too much of a time commitment. So, you know, our time is precious. 1 hour is a lot to give up. If you are going to give it up, this presentation has to be something that really benefits you. If it fails to do so, you're likely not going to come back. So we're going to try to keep our webinar today to 45 minutes, which is still a decent chunk. But hopefully with the ideas that we give you today applied to both your webinar and our webinar series, we can start to cut them down even further, kind of thinking along those lines of video consumption. So again, these first few bullets are going to equal less registrations, which are equaling less attendees. And if your format is less captivating, the less leads you get out of the attendees that you do have. So your crowds may go from something like this to something a little bit more like this. And a combination of all these together, it kind of ends up with a losing situation. So how are we going to combat this fatigue? In 2010, only 42% of B2B marketers were doing webinars, and today it's actually around 62%, so that's a 20% increase. But it's no wonder then that people are kind of fading with so many of the invites, like I mentioned, coming across your inbox. What really makes yours stand out? And how do we kind of combat this fast-spreading epidemic of webinar fatigue? So I kind of likened it to a ninja. You really do have to get ahead of the curve, making moves before your competition does when it comes to using this as a lead gen tactic, and maybe adding a little bit of an element of surprise. So we hope we can give you some tactics today that will help you to do so. And keep an eye out for the quick tips that you'll see in each section, kind of called out by a little blue badge, again, for quick wins that you guys can use in your webinar series. So let's jump into Chapter 1, and you'll kind of see this theme throughout with the chapters, and we'll get into why we do that later. But Chapter 1 here is going to be about contents for leads, not just views. So I think although more of us would like to get more views on our content, increase that attendance, what we really have to consider first is what is our objective. Is it quality of leads or is it quantity of leads? And I don't think that's a new concept. But I think for the majority of you it is going to be quality of leads, as we kind of saw in that poll. So in this section we're going to touch on how to create content that's not just for the masses, but really for those prospects that matter to you, and the ways to keep that message going even after your webinar is over. So I'm sure that we've all seen a graphic of some sort outlining which type of content to use at different stages of the funnel or the buying cycle. But the point, again, that I really want to bring home here is that webinars, I think, are unique in the sense that we can really use them at any stage of the funnel to deliver a message. So we start with the topic, and what I want to think about here is your topic just a best practices presentation, or is it something that is super specific to the way that your audience or your prospect is going to benefit in X process by using your product and making them better at their job? And really, by the nature of what you're talking about, you can begin to determine where that prospect is in the funnel. And what you need to think about is really just giving them enough information in the presentation to set a hook and make a case for the challenge that they're facing that maybe they haven't even realized yet. And this hook is going to keep them coming back for more information from you, and continues to help you feed them the relevant information for where they are in the funnel. Another way to craft your messaging, I think, is determine the stage funnel that you want to target first, and then begin to craft your your topic around that, which I think is potentially what the majority of people are doing. Again, kind of creating that compelling hook for the message that highlights a challenge, and let your audience then self-select where they are in the funnel by offering them up chances to give you that relevant pain point, whether that's in the registration form off the bat, whether it's in poll questions that you've crafted, their chatted questions, survey questions, etc. So I do think that these two pieces here, the hook or the funnel stage, are interchangeable depending on how you want to craft your topic, but something to kind of keep in mind. Which is then going to help you, once you've determined where they are in the funnel, this is going to help you determine your follow-up. So making sure that you're utilizing the appropriate content and the call to action that's relevant to that stage. So you might start thinking, if this is a best practices presentation, very top of the funnel, the people are kind of looking for information. What do I want to give them in my follow-up to craft that message? Maybe it's something like an infographic. Easier to consume, maybe a little bit less information, giving them some pointers. If they're farther down the funnel, again, maybe you're using that webinar to push that message home, highlight a product, or maybe it's a testimonial then when you're really trying to seal the deal. So I want to bounce over to Eric, and he's going to give a specific example of how that they have used webinars in each stage of their funnel.
Yeah, I think webinars are often placed into either early or middle or late. We like to use them across all of our stages. So on the left-hand side, we can be very general. That's basically anyone that would ever be interested in content. When we get to the middle stage, it's anyone that would actually be interested in outsourcing content. Then very late stage is just for our own customers and just how to use our own services. And I think that this is definitely effective. The more specific you are to your title and your audience, you know exactly who they are. So on the left-hand side, it was definitely a very broad audience. It wasn't very targeted. So I think in the middle, we got probably our best leads from that webinar.
Awesome. And this is kind of a image that I pulled from HubSpot again to just kind of push this point home that I think webinars really are an equal opportunity form of content. They've got them here in the awareness and the evaluation stage, but to Eric's point, they've used them as far down as in the purchase phase as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another way to look at it is we all kind of break up our content in terms of buyer stage, which is absolutely the right thing to do. As a content company, our editorial calendar is always being managed months in advance, and we always have to think about what are we going to be creating next month. And I think an easy way to think about that is this pyramid of content that we kind of created last month. And at the base of it, you have your kind of evergreen content, your how-tos, your listicles, and you kind of need this content to kind of be there to engage and just join conversations. But at the very top, you have your thought leadership. So if you think about it as value at the top, that's going to take the most time to create. And so we have things like from our CEO writing analysis on the content industry or creating an infographic, but kind of when you come down there, that infographic can be divided up into long form or evergreen content, and then even just joining the conversation through your newsworthy and trend content, and that can be applied to webinars as well when you're thinking about inception of ideas and things like that. And then, again, I really want to bring home this point of just being very specific. The first webinar we ever did was how to plan your content for 2014. And I laugh at it because we actually created over 70 slides for this webinar, and we were trying to cover everything from setting goals to actually building the calendar to creating the content and promoting and budgeting and analyzing everything. And it was such a broad topic that it was just hard to even dive into anything very specifically. So be as specific as possible. Have a shorter webinar, I think, in the future, and that way you know exactly why people are signing up for your webinar. And then the last thing that I would love to communicate is just make sure everyone in your company knows what webinars are coming up. I think it's very easy for a marketing department to kind of keep all of our own marketing within ourselves and just kind of we know what's going on, but making sure that you're sending maybe a weekly newsletter to your own sales team or just at a team lunch or at a meeting. We had a webinar coming up about promoting content with Taboola, and we had a lead that our sales department was talking to, and they just mentioned that they could join this webinar. It's a really, really good kind of validation tactic for them, and actually, we started a trial with that lead, and we continue to kind of update our sales department on that.
Awesome. So now that we've kind of covered why we want to start creating content specifically to generate leads, not just views, I want to jump to our Chapter 2, which is creating digestible webinar formats. And I know I just saw a couple kind of questions come in on what do we consider digestible or what is short, and we're definitely going to touch on that in this particular chapter. So if I haven't got to my point on this slide in less than 9 seconds, then you have already started probably checking your email, maybe answering a text message, talking to a coworker across the way. And the point we're trying to be here is that we really need to, I think, start rethinking our typical webinar template. So how am I actually going to keep your attention? And again, that's by creating this digestible bits, if you will. So 90% of internet traffic is video content. And the average length of a single internet video watched is 2.7 minutes. And that is way shorter than your typical webinar, even this one. So point taken home. We'll be sure to use this in our upcoming webinars. But keep this in mind then as I go on to our next point. So I'm giving you just enough information hopefully to get to my next point. And like I said, if you've noticed before, we've kind of got this theme going on here where we're creating mini segments within the webinar itself that address a specific topic that as a whole make up this entire presentation. So we've made it very apparent where each of our segments, or chapters maybe as you might want to call them, are by calling out each section. And this is really going to help us find those cut points quicker and make repurposing content much easier when it comes to our recordings. So these mini segments can really be used as a standalone piece of content or as a part of a series, maybe short workshops that we could push out each week in a blog, maybe in an email campaign, point to them in social posts, add to our YouTube page for quick content, etc. So I had to use a relevant example if there's many Colorado people in the crowd. I'm from ReadyTalk is based here in Colorado, and we're full of microbreweries, so I had to use this. Which of these forms is more digestible? And we'll say maybe over the course of a weekend for one person. We've got the keg, or we've got kind of a growler going on here. It's a growler, right? So it's not quite a full keg, but it's still plenty of beer that's got you're feeling satisfied. Maybe you've got room later on in the weekend to consume the rest. But if you think about promoting your webinar with these shorter forms of formats, I should say, it may actually serve as an incentive for registrants to actually attend when they know they're going to get the full amount of information, but it's just in a shortened time span. So like Eric's example, they had one presentation that was 70 slides long, and you realize not everything has to be smashed into one webinar. So breaking up that content if need be to cater to people's attention spans, which are getting shorter and shorter like we mentioned before, and also their ability to actually digest what you're saying. So it makes this content much more sticky than trying to cover everything in one swoop. Plus it gives you a chance to create more additional content or additional webinars and hopefully engage new audiences. So a couple examples that we actually used in this webinar itself, or that you guys hopefully can apply to yours, one idea is what I like to call Twitter Talks. So maybe that 30-minute format followed by a Twitter discussion, creating a hashtag for those that really want to dive deeper into this discussion and following the conversation there. Another might be the Google Hangouts after party. So jump on a Hangout session following the webinar to dive further into the discussion around the Q&A if they'd like to. It's kind of an after party for people that just haven't got enough and they don't want to go home yet. But again, they don't have to stay in an hour-long webinar. If they got what they needed in the first 30 minutes and then they would like to continue the discussion, think about breaking it out into something like this. Maybe it's a name your own format, and I kind of had fun. This one, maybe we'll call it a vidinar. Did I just make up a new marketing term? And this is, again, a real-life example I'll show you in a second. But think of the idea of maybe filming a video of the webinar presenters and promoting that actually as your event versus just the typical slide deck. Basically, it would be a pre-recorded webinar topic with the video aspect to make it more engaging. And for the example that I want to show you that we did here in our own series, we took the questions that came from the Q&A portion and turned that into a video with the speakers after the fact. That way, the people that didn't attend the webinar still had a really good recap of really the important questions that we thought that came from like-minded peers and stood out in the event, and it was way shorter. It's 15 minutes long versus the hour that we had spent on the regular webinar. We actually sent this video out in a follow-up email, pointed to it on our blog, and our social channels, and put it up on our YouTube page like I mentioned. So the idea here is get creative. Your webinars don't have to follow that typical webinar protocol, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So I'm going to show you guys a quick 20-second clip of this Q&A session that we put together.
Hi, my name is Simone Neighbors, and I am the Demand Generation Manager here at ReadyTalk.
And I'm Brandon Hess, the Inbound Marketing Manager here at ReadyTalk.
And this is our first attempt at a Q&A session from a recent webinar that we did in our monthly webinar series, so it should be just as exciting for you all as it is for us.
All right, so hopefully from that I want to flip it over to Eric again to kind of talk about a little bit more of the factors as far as engagement go in your webinar series.
Yeah, I always love it when I go to a presentation and the company or the presenter actually shows me what stats they're seeing. And, by no means are these the industry standards or anything like that. It's just what I pulled for this webinar, and I felt like sharing. It could be almost like a live case study consultancy part. But I found some pretty interesting things. We're seeing an average attendee rate of 34%. Simone, I'd be curious to know what ReadyTalk's average is, but I'm feeling okay with that. And the thing is that the people who are attending, 83% are listening to the entire webinar, and our webinar in the past has been about 45 minutes. I think we'll experiment and see if we do like a 30-minute or something like that and see what happens. And then I was curious to see from the people that didn't attend, you always send out that follow-up email. You always send them the information, whether it's a blog post or a recap, and we send them the link to go to the webinar. And only 25% of the people who would register to watch the webinar would actually listen to the entire thing. Now, I guess you could also argue that down. That is pretty low, but there's also, you could fast forward through the recording. You could also, it's a lot easier to get distracted. And I think what we do during the live webinar is we're always asking polls. We're making it very interactive. Obviously, you'd be more tied to listen to the entire webinar if you're asking questions. You're waiting for that to be answered. So the people who do answer polls are 63% of the people who are actually listening to the webinar. So I thought that was pretty good. Means that they're not completely spacing out. And then it's random email open rates, which I think are probably pretty standard. But felt like sharing. I hope you guys can at least feel like you're not alone. If you're seeing better rates in this, excellent. If not, I think there's definitely things that we can all do to improve as long as we know what's going on.
Awesome. So, and yeah, Eric, to your point, I would say average attendance rate, ours is definitely right around there, 34 to about 40% now, whereas I would say even a year and a half ago it was closer to 50-55%. And like I said, I've told Eric this, but from peers that I've talked to working with a number of webinars, I think everybody is starting to kind of see those attendance rates drop. That's why it's super important that we're taking advantage of other aspects of our content, maybe not focusing just so much on the live attendance rate, which is part of the point that we do want to bring home today here at the webinar. So that'll close out Chapter 2 for us, and so we're going to move on to Chapter 3, which is crowdsourced webinar content, what they want to hear, not just what you want to talk about. And I touched on this briefly earlier when we kind of discussed formulating your webinar topic. So we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper and address the ways that you can get your target audience to generate that topic for you. And I thought this little comic was pretty fitting. We've got people us on the left here, what we want to say, the message that we want to tell. We've got our prospect audience on the right here, what they're really interested in, and then we've got this little tiny sliver of relevance in the middle that we really need to focus on capturing. So how do we actually do that? So I put together 5 ways that I think you can generate some relevant content. And I know we mentioned the Twitter discussion before, as far as kind of captivating your audience, but I think this is another great way to go about that. Registering a hashtag, and I'll show you the example of what we did here to crowdsource the content. Like I said, the hashtag at the beginning was Webinar Wake Up. We promoted our Twitter discussion on the Twitter channel itself, obviously. We pointed to it in a reminder email. We pointed to it in this hello bar. This is an example that goes on the top of our website when people see it. It drops down. We put it in our newsletter. We put it in our LinkedIn discussions. And we pointed back to Twitter as the channel to start generating points of discussion, questions that people might have. So again, we could craft some of our messaging around that. And I'll pull some of these questions in a little bit later on when we get to the Q&A portion. But we generated a pretty decent amount of discussion on our LinkedIn channel. So it's a fantastic place to start getting people talking about, to figure out, again, what is relevant to them, not just the message that you think you want to tout this month. 2 and 3, LinkedIn group discussion in a blog post. So what we did was then took that hashtag, we began a LinkedIn discussion, and pointed people back to Twitter, or we asked them to leave their comments in the thread on LinkedIn. And then we promoted those discussion points on our blog, and we asked for additional suggestions. So this is not kind of just a one-off random promotion. I'm going to send an email and hope that helps to generate a good audience that is the target audience that I want to. I'm actually pulling from live discussions and using those to push to my other promotional channels. Number 4, utilizing the FAQs on your website. If you haven't thought of this before, this was kind of a newer one to us too, I would say in the last year, but those questions that are continually coming in through other teams throughout your company that you guys are updating maybe it's monthly, maybe it's yearly, to put on your website. Why aren't you using those to generate the topics for your webinar series? Obviously, they're a pain point for people. And then lastly, taking advantage of other departments' knowledge, especially I would say here your customer care team, because they know what people want to know. They're talking to them day in and day out, and this actually, 1, is going to make your topic more relevant, more timely, and 2, it could be a factor in driving up live attendance rate, because now your customer care team has an additional place to push those people, maybe not just to the website, to the FAQ section, but now they can point them to maybe it was a recorded piece of content that you've done to answer these questions, maybe it's a live webinar coming up. So certainly areas to think about when you are trying to generate relevant content. And so your next steps here, when you are promoting them to the channels that you've tapped in to generate those ideas, it makes it far more relevant. It makes it timely. You're addressing the challenges that these people are coming up with and spouting off on these different channels. So it's thoughtful. It's not just a sales pitch anymore. And again, it could be a factor to increase your live attendance rates. So I think when you kind of put all these signs together, Charlie Sheen would say that we are winning. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to Eric to give a couple more examples.
Sure. I guess my last example is, we were talking about keeping our audience engaged. I think we should reward them for attending a webinar, for engaging with us and answering questions. So I'd say keep it fun. Maybe put them in a raffle. So let's do it right now. I'll practice what I preach. So what we'll do is I have a poll question. If you answer the poll question, it's just about what your greatest content challenges are right now. Then I will award 2 random respondees 2 free blog posts on anything that they want. So anything and any topic that you need written, we'll write it for you and deliver back. So thank you for participating. And I guess this is another idea you guys can kind of take with you and answer in your next webinar. So what is your biggest challenge with content creation? Is it not knowing what to produce, not creating enough? Is it that you're not sure how to measure the performance of the content, lack of budget, lack of time, or not getting enough views trying to promote it?
That's interesting to see that lack of budget is not one of the content challenges. That's awesome for those of you that have a good budget. I feel like sometimes that could be one of the first ones that is cut out of this process.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Okay, well, it looks like mostly it's around measuring content performance and promotion and lack of time. I think the latest Content Marketing Institute poll from the beginning of 2014, it was lack of time was the first one, actually. But I guess there we go. To each audience is different. Well, thanks for participating. I will award the winners after the webinar.
Awesome. So, kind of do a quick recap here again, and we'll jump into Chapter 4. So we've covered content for leads, not just views in Chapter 1. Chapter 2, we've covered digestible webinar formats. So what is bite-sized, what can your audience handle, and also thinking about that when you're repurposing your content. Chapter 3, crowdsourced webinar content. So how are you generating those ideas to make them timely and relevant? And then Chapter 4 here, which is a little bit of crossover from Chapter 2, but we'll try to break it out a little bit more. But the idea of webinar inception. So the gift that kind of keeps on giving. All right. So according to this stat, is from 2013. It came from a survey of 400 B2B marketing professionals. This is done by Pardot. The average attendance rate is slowly decreasing. So this being said, 84% of your registrants don't actually care if they see a live event. That's not saying that only 16% are now attending, but typically 84%, it may or may not be of consequence that they actually get to your live event. So, in all reality, we can say that, hey, they might be DVRing us. And based on your own personal experience and what you see, you might actually do the same thing. Like I said, we're getting tons of webinar invites. What merits our time to actually jump on it and attend the live event? So a lot of these people are going to be looking for the webinar recording that you're sending out afterwards, or maybe that they come across on their own in researching a particular topic later on. So we've talked about the tactics that are going to help you increase your webinar attendance rates, hopefully. But there's still people, again, that are really just going to value that recording. So you want to make sure that this recorded content leaves a really lasting impression, because that might actually be the only one that you get. Marketers really have to think about, are we missing out on the biggest boat of leads because they never actually attend the event, and we fail to take a closer look at what we're actually doing with the content that we have afterwards. So with the idea of webinar inception that we've talked about is kind of creating these mini segments within your webinar. So a webinar within a webinar. Thinking about the natural cut points where you can slice and dice this content up and repurpose it. There's a lot of content, as you can see here, that can be reused from a webinar, and you want to make sure that you're wringing it out, getting the most out of it that you absolutely can. So when you're thinking about the webinar recording, plan ahead with your speakers so that they're on board with the concept of maybe chaptering this webinar or creating natural breakpoints during the live event that can be easily edited and make up those bite-sized recording snippets. So thus the reason you kind of see these chapters pop out in our webinar, because we want to be able to take each of those chapters and cut it up and maybe into its own mini webinar and promote those on different channels versus only having this one 45-minute long webinar to do so with. So again, the idea here being reutilizing it, recycling it, reimagining it as many places as you can. So utilize those different pieces of recorded content to repurpose it on your blog, to put it on your YouTube channel, to embed on your website or landing pages that might relate to another piece of content that you're trying to promote. And when you're doing this, think about your own attention span. How long do you typically watch a video? Is it a minute? Maybe it's 3 minutes max. So if you think about the people you're targeting, they probably got the same bandwidth as you. We're all super busy, and we're looking for that succinct message. Tell me what I need to do to make my job easier, to make this project easier. So cut out the fluff and really get to the good stuff. Another way to think about this, I think, is think about your webinars as a set of brand new tires. They don't do you any good if you use them once and then you park them in your garage. You're going to try to get the most mileage out of those tires as absolutely possible. So once you're done with the tires, you could throw them away in the tire graveyard or a huge waste yard, or you could turn them back into something unique that is going to attract an entirely new audience, or again, the relevant audience that can take your message to heart and really utilize it. So I think the same goes with webinars. Don't let them go to waste and just throw them on your archive page hoping that they're going to generate the traffic there or capture the leads that you really want there and let them die. Reimagine the ways that you can repurpose your webinar content. So we went from new set of tires to a junkyard of tires to this crazy lion sculpture created out of tires. An example that I'll give from you, is this, do you think this is 5 webinars or do you think this is actually 1 webinar? And we did this in our own series recently. There was a webinar called Maximizing the Impact of Webinars as a Lead Gen Channel. That was a lot of webinar terms in one sentence. We were able to cut this 60-minute webinar up into 5 2 to 3 minute snippets that captured the essence of the entire event, but talked about a very specific part of that topic, which is exactly what we're doing today with kind of chaptering out this webinar. We then put those snippets on landing pages and then drove traffic to them via all our promotional mediums, like I've mentioned before, social, email, blog, LinkedIn group discussions, archive page. So we're really trying to maximize this recorded content and continue to capture leads after the live event. And this is just 1 webinar. So if you have a whole archive of webinars that's sitting on some page, pick one that's most relevant, most timely, maybe one that you had most success with, and see if you can break it down and do the same. I'll hand it over to Eric to dive into this a little bit more from the scripted side.
Yeah, I think for one of our last tips here, I'd say everyone does the blog post recap. We like to kind of summarize exactly what the main points are. We also upload everything on SlideShare so people can access our slides. That's usually the most common question. People always want to make sure that they have the slides. It's just really easy to distribute around your office and things like that. But something else that we also do is we offer worksheets. So it's kind of like just a little thank you for attending the webinar. Here's something you can actually take home and practice what you just learned. So if it is about creating an editorial calendar, we'll give you a free editorial calendar worksheet to kind of think through your to-do list. So if there's anything like that you can give back to your audience, I would highly recommend creating it. It's just I had really, really good engagement rates.
And we'll touch base with Eric to see if we can maybe throw that worksheet or an example of such on our follow-up email so you can get that as well. So it's kind of a quick wrap-up here, so we have time to dive into Q&A and hopefully keep our promise to you of trying to keep this to 45 minutes. If the Q&A goes over, feel free to drop off. Again, it's all being recorded, but we'll try to keep it to 45 minutes. And we've got a ton of questions. But my recap here is going back to the beginning. 1, create your content for leads, not just views. So utilize webinars at really any stage, but thinking about what does your topic actually tell you about the audience, or vice versa, are you creating your topic for a specific stage and then letting those leads kind of self-select where they are. 2, develop your webinar in a digestible format. Rethink your typical webinar format, what's easier to consume, and I think this is going to come into play then when we get to number 4, thinking about that recorded content. So number 3, consider tactics to crowdsource your webinar content, utilizing your social channels. What do they want to hear, not just what you want to talk about? And then lastly, this idea of webinar inception or reimagining your recordings. Think mini segments or chapters, again, back to those digestible formats that don't just throw a 60-minute long, 45-minute long webinar back onto your archive page and hope it performs well by luck. Really make those recordings work for you, since we are, as a trend, starting to see webinar attendance rates drop off. We really need to take advantage of that recorded content and not rely strictly on people attending the live event. So on that point, I am going to dive into some of the questions. I may answer some of them myself. I'll see if Eric wants to answer a couple of them. We'll try to get through as many as we can. Again, like I said, if you need to drop off, feel free to do so, but we've got some good questions here. So do you have any information on how many webinars each month should be aired, or I would assume kind of a live content, or excuse me, a live webinar. This question is from Victoria. She schedules 24 to 30 monthly, and that is impressive, Victoria. Is that 24 to 30? Maybe you can answer me. Is that 24 to 30 events each month? And I guess my question would be to you is, how long are each of those webinars? Because that is a lot of planning time. So kudos to you for doing that. My suggestion, honestly, to keep it manageable from my own experience with our webinar series, and Eric, feel free to chime in here if you have suggestions as well, but we used to do anywhere from 4 to 6 per month. But we found that, again, it points back to the quality. What are you trying to do? Do I really want to target leads, prospects that I can eventually push over to my sales team for my webinar, or am I just kind of trying to do a huge net catch-all with a topic and hope that those people then decide to come back for another one? So we actually honed ours down from 4 to 6, that it's maybe between 1 and 2 per month, but we put a lot of work into the promotional aspect of that webinar as well, and very carefully choosing the partners who we speak with, like Scripted, maybe partners that we have integrations with on our webinar platform, etc., that we have a similar target audience for. So I guess really to answer that question, it could be up to you as far as your bandwidth goes, but I would focus on quality of those webinars and how well they target the audience that you're trying to reach versus the quantity and getting a bunch of leads that really don't eventually do your sales team any good. Eric, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just comes down to how many different audiences you have. If you just have one audience, that would be pretty overwhelming. But maybe you're a company that just has a lot of different audiences that you want to put on webinars for, and that would be the only way that I would feel like that you could pull it off. But yeah, we do about 2 webinars that are like lead gen marketing webinars. Then we like to do another 2 webinars a month that are more like internal. We like to have scripted office hours, which is just a webinar on how to use Scripted and things like that. So it probably comes down to bandwidth, like you said.
Awesome. Ashley, I think we answered your question, kind of define short. Does that mean 30 minutes? Does that mean 1 hour? I think my suggestion on that is that webinars are moving towards a shorter version. So yes, that 30-minute time frame, or maybe you frame it as, we're going to do 30 minutes of the presentation, and then we're going to do 15 minutes of Q&A. Feel free to drop off if you'd like, or again, jump over to our Google Hangouts to join that conversation, or follow the hashtag where we do a recap of our Q&A session, but keeping that message very succinct. And the people that want to dive deeper into the details, they can do so if they'd like to invest additional time. But I do see those webinar formats moving shorter and shorter. Eric, maybe this is a great one for you because you're on the content side of things. When we're kind of crafting our messaging around what this webinar is going to be, do you have any recommendations on how to create a really great subject line or title for your webinar presentation?
Yeah, actually there's a ton of really good resources out there that I could probably send to Ashley that would really kind of get your work going. But one best practice that it's hard to implement, or at least it's hard to kind of make your team do this, but Coffee Blogger recommends that you come up with 25 different titles before you choose one title. So whether that's for your webinar or for your blog post, it really just kind of forces your team to kind of think more than just that one topic. Any sort of hooks, secrets too, or things like that are always great. There's probably a list, actually on our Scripted blog, we talk a lot about headlines. But I would just say start with thinking more than just 1 or 2. Really try to push the limits there, and then think of the hook.
Awesome. We've got a question here from Tara, and she says their suggested day of the week or time of day for capturing maybe the most registrants or attendees for your webinar. Scheduling a webinar, I would say on our series, we typically try to hold it somewhere in the middle of the week, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We've certainly experimented around with different times, so most people are going to do it over their lunch hour, but I think it kind of going back to the whole idea of is people's time valuable enough for them to give you the hour of their lunchtime? You better make it. so, or cutting it a little bit shorter, so a 30-minute format, maybe over that lunch hour type thing. If you go later in the day, depends on how late, maybe where your audience is, East Coast, West Coast, type of thing. Eric, what do you guys do on your webinar series?
I think we're always either 10 or 11 a.m. Pacific time. We're in San Francisco. It's just I haven't really experimented with anything else, so
yep.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we've moved ours from kind of a 1 o'clock Eastern up to a 11 o'clock Eastern before, and you just have to, I guess, maybe take into consideration where you think the majority of your audience is coming from. So that would be my suggestion, Tara. Hopefully that helps. We have another one here. How many invites or reminders do you send out for each webinar? So on our webinar series at ReadyTalk, we're sending out 2 emails, and one goes out a week before the webinar, which I think a lot of people might be like, oh, wow, that doesn't seem too far out from the webinar. But I feel like if you send it 4 weeks out, people they register and they forget, or it falls off. So we send our promotions out a week before, and then again the day before, and we've got some logic built into our marketing automation platform that says, did they open the invite? Great. Did they click on it? No. Okay, I'm going to put them in a bucket and resend it again the day before. Did they not open it at all? I'll be sure to send it a day before. So that's kind of how our invite process goes, but we also are sending it out with our monthly newsletter. It's going up on our website beforehand, so it's garnering some traffic, I would say at least 3 to 4 weeks out, outside of just the invites that we sent. And then our reminder cadence is 24 hours before and then an hour before the webinar. What do you guys do, Eric?
Pretty much the same thing. I think I like to get it up on our website at around 2 to 3 weeks, just so it's there, and then an invite about 2 weeks. But as long as you're diligent about following up with your invitations, a week is fine.
Awesome. Let's see. Do you recommend, this question from John, do you recommend any third-party vendors that can deliver quality registrations and attendees? John, I think that probably depends most on, again, who your target audience is. We've never really paired with anybody for promoting a webinar per se. We've certainly paired with vendors for content syndication before, but I do have a couple of recommendations that I think are great for that, and they also do webinar promotions. We just have a decent in-house list that has worked really well for us to promote, but Net Prospects is great. HG Data is really great if you're maybe kind of trying to target on a specific technology install of customers, which is important for us. eMedia is another one that we've used before that are pretty good. Yep. So I'm happy to find others and email you directly, John, but those are a few. And maybe, Eric, you have some additional ones?
Yeah, I mean, eMedia is a great one. Also, it really comes down to your audience. Like accessing the AMA for the Marketing Association, or really any publication. And some advice I've heard is if you are going to sponsor or pay for leads, try to get an exclusive invite. So pay more to get a completely owned email out to those kind of target list of leads, rather than, I'd say, jumping on a bandwagon of other promoter webinars. I've just heard that's going to perform better and probably worth paying a little bit more for that.
Yeah, and another place to utilize it's free and not necessarily vendors are maybe those communities that you're heavily involved with, or that you're maybe positioned as a thought leader. We're really heavily involved with the Eloqua community, which is a marketing automation platform I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and utilizing their kind of community platform, which is Topliners, and promoting there. And that's a great place to think about garnering some additional registrations or attendees where your message is relevant and people kind of already know who you are, versus just blasting out an email to a new list that you've sourced. All right, I know we've gone over about 6 minutes. I will wrap it up here. Let's see, I've got a bunch more questions, but we'll try to do just one, and maybe we can do an additional recap like I showed you guys previously. Okay, we answered that one. Any of you aware of webinar services that allow you to easily transfer your webinar recordings to YouTube? Of course, have to be a little bit biased here, coming from ReadyTalk. We don't have a direct push to YouTube channel, but we do allow you to easily reformat that webinar recording into a number of different formats, MP4s being one of those, and it takes all of, depending on the length of your webinar, maybe 10 minutes max, and then taking that and uploading into YouTube. So pretty simple format there. As far as other webinars that push directly to YouTube, I'm not aware, and I'm not just saying that, I promise. But I think one thing to focus on there, yes, that direct push is awesome, but also how easy is it to kind of edit that recording in the first place. And I know for a lot of webinar providers, it's a little bit of a runaround. And like I said, I'm a little biased, but we do have a phenomenal, very easy, user-friendly recording tool. So I will leave it at that as far as self-promotion goes and wrap up the webinar here. You guys had a ton of great questions. Fiona, to your question, any suggestions for captioning 3-play media? That's another good one, quick one to answer there. I'll wrap it up. I know we're over the 45-minute mark. Thanks for those of you that stayed on. We had a pretty fair chunk. Great questions. We'll definitely be doing a recap blog on this. We'll pull in some resources from Scripted to help us put this together as well. Keep an eye out for the recording, like I said, in the post-event email, as well as a PDF of the slide decks. And we usually put a couple of additional content resources in there for you guys that relate to the content or the questions that came across in Q&A. So hopefully a bunch of good stuff, takeaways for you guys there as well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon, for the great questions, for being such a participatory audience. We will be sure to get that email example worksheet that Eric mentioned, and he'll follow up with the winners of the blog posts as well. So any closing remarks from you, Eric?
No, thanks for having me on. I hope that was useful. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a great crowd. You guys are awesome. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your week. We hope to see you again on another event in our webinar series. Thanks, everybody.